All right, so we'll get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this session today. My name is Seher Shafiq, and I work at North York Community House as the Active Citizenship Manager. A little housekeeping before we get into the content. This will be a very interactive session, and we will all be engaging with each other in various different ways, including through the chat box, through polls, and small group discussions. I also want to note that there will be simultaneous ASL and French interpretations, and encourage people during our discussion near the end of this session to speak slowly so that the interpreter has the ability to accurately interpret what's being said. Next slide, please. So before we get into the session, we want to start with a land acknowledgement and say that we are all newcomers, whether our families have lived here for months or for a century. At some point, our families immigrated here and began new lives in this new land, Canada. In some parts of Canada, Indigenous people have been present for over 10,000 years, and each wave of settlement over the centuries has displaced Indigenous people from their traditional lands and way of life, leading to a chain of injustices. And while many of us did come here as immigrants and newcomers, we also want to acknowledge that some people did come here forcibly, and specifically those that came here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. The partners for this project, the Active Citizenship Project, all have headquarters based in Toronto, and the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Toronto is the dish with one spoon territory, which is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers were invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. The dish, as is sometimes called the bowl, represents what is now southern Ontario, from the Great Lakes to Quebec and from Lake Simcoe to the United States. We all eat out of this dish, all of us that share this territory, with only one spoon. What that means is that we share the responsibility of ensuring that the dish is never empty, and that includes taking care of the land and the creatures that we share it with. As newcomers to this land, we recognize that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada are the traditional stewards of this land. And we recognize that their traditional ways of life and their ties to this land were forcibly disrupted to benefit our own. We wish to express gratitude to the earth and for the resources that we are using. We also honor all of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on this land since time immemorial. Can we advance to the next slide, please? So we would like to get a sense of where in this land you are all based through a Zoom poll. And so tech team, if we could get our first Zoom poll, we'd like to know from the audience, where in Ontario are you? And we'll leave that poll up for about a minute to allow people to answer. All right, I'll share the results. So thanks everyone. It looks like we have some representation from most areas in the province, with the majority of you in the Toronto area and Southern. So that's good to know as we have our discussions. So the objectives of this session today are threefold. First, we want to introduce you to the Journeys to Active Citizenship project. And we also want to share our learning so far about what we've heard from you, from the sector. After we do some sharing, we're going to have an opportunity to do some small group discussions and reimagine what settlement services can entail in the future, but specifically as they relate to active citizenship and civic engagement. Can we have the next slide, please? So in terms of how we'll be spending our time together, we have about 90 minutes together today, about 70 remaining. And we will first share some of our research and learning. We'll have a few minutes for some reflections from you through the chat box. Then we'll do some breakout sessions, come back as a larger group to have a discussion, and then our team will share ways that you can stay connected to this project. Next slide. And before we jump into the content, we want to tell you a little bit about who we are as a project team. So our project team consists of 4 organizations that you see on the screen and is funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada through a 5-year project. And to the partners on this call, I'm going to introduce you, and I know we have the slides on the screen, but feel free to give a little wave as I call your name so we can put some faces to names. So at North York Community House, we have myself as the Active Citizenship Manager. We have Lena Alipur, who is the coordinator for the Active Citizenship Project. Hi, Lena, and she's also advancing the slides and has supported a lot in this presentation. And we have Jin Ha, who is the program director at North York Community House, who you'll be hearing from very shortly. At OCASI, we have Sohail Bauji, who is the coordinator for the project, and Martha Oriana, who works in membership services. Hi, Sohail, and hi, Martha. At the Ryerson Democratic Engagement Exchange, we have John Beebe, who is the senior advisor. Hi, John. And last but not least, at Lawn & Co, we have Peg Lawn and Cameron Norman. Hi, Peg and Cam. So before I pass it over to Jen to share about our project learning so far, we want to do another quick poll and hear from you if you have heard about the Journeys to Active Citizenship project before. So tech team, if we could throw up poll number 2 and have it going for about a minute as well, please. Give people maybe 15, 20 more seconds if they haven't responded yet. And I see we've had a lot more people join the session, so feel free to also introduce yourself in the chat. It's great to know who's in the room and what organizations everyone is from. It's nice to see some familiar faces as well. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results. So the majority of you have not heard of the project, and there's 2 people in the room have heard of it and have participated in one of our previous sessions. So that's really good for us to know as we go through this session. Thank you for sharing that. All right, with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jen, who's going to share some learnings about our project.
Great, thanks Sahar. Welcome everyone. It's so great to see all of you today. So I'm going to present on behalf of the partners that Sahar just introduced and share some of the highlights of the work that we have collectively done to date. So first I want to share with you a bit about our project origin story, who we are, what we do, and how this project got started, as well as what we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to start with North York Community House, or Niche as we call it, where I work. We are a 30-year-old multi-service neighborhood center that serves approximately 15,000 to 20,000 residents annually across the northwest part of Toronto. And most of them are immigrants and refugees that we serve through our settlement services. And we've done a lot of strategizing and work around how to embed civic engagement and community development across all our program areas and services and organizational systems as a means to contribute more meaningfully towards systems change, social justice, and a strengthened community-based sector. So we've been able to build our experience in this area over the past 20 years or so, and we've made some interesting gains in the last few years, thinking about how to connect direct services focused at supporting people at the individual level with program interventions that contribute also to broader community and system level changes. And we've also made some interesting gains through our partnership recently with the Democratic Engagement Exchange at Ryerson University, who's a leader in developing and supporting programs, building tools and resources to foster democratic engagement, including in their work with community-based organizations. They're well known for their vote pop-ups, which are supported by Elections Canada and have been implemented all across Canada, as well as their Democracy Talks program, which has been co-developed with Niche and others, that provides participants an opportunity to talk about issues that matter to them in a way that's both fun and meaningful. And from our experience, the Democracy Talks program, a good starting point for newcomers to engage civically in Canada for the first time. So building off of this successful partnership between Ryerson and Niche, we started to have conversations with others, with OCASI, other partners in the sector, with the citizenship branch at IRCC. And we started to explore how we might build an active citizenship program for immigrant and refugee serving organizations that would be tested across Ontario and available all across Canada. And a program that would enable newcomers to play a significantly bigger role in shaping a vision for Canada, one that's more inclusive and equitable. So we wanted to build off the great advocacy work of OCASI and many of you and others who advocate on behalf of immigrants and refugees, and find ways to bring newcomers themselves into the conversation in a more comprehensive and supported way beyond what each of us are doing at an agency level. As you all know, OCASI represents the collective voice of the sector across Ontario and advances equality and access for refugees and immigrants through advocacy for progressive legislation and policies. And they also play a critical role in sector capacity building and leadership in providing for online information, resources, and communities of practice, both in English and French. So OCASI will play a key role in this initiative on a number of fronts, including supporting the sector to engage and build towards a shared vision of active citizenship. And with this initiative, we aim to leverage the sector's collective expertise and insight and create concrete tools, pathways, resources, and opportunities that enable meaningful engagement of immigrants and refugees in civic arenas. So the project, we believe, also offers us an opportunity for all of us to expand our thinking about the possibilities of what gets included and resourced under settlement services, and enable the sector to expand our offerings in the realm of civic engagement and active citizenship in a supported way. So from the beginning, we knew we needed to co-design anything that comes out of this initiative with the sector and with immigrants and refugees themselves, building on the expertise that exists all across the province and beyond, and create something that's relevant and speaks to the realities and diversity of what immigrants and refugees and the organizations that serve them experience in different parts of the province. So we decided to bring in some expertise, consultants that can guide us in participatory research, innovative co-design methods, developmental evaluation, and complex systems transformation. So Lon and Co Consulting, they have 16 years of experience leading strategic innovation and system and service design for national impact on issues related to health, social policy, and democracy. So those are our partners, and then we were lucky enough to receive 5-year funding from IRCC, who agreed that we need to put some resources into building active citizenship programs for immigrant and refugee serving organizations. And they were willing to support an initiative that aimed to co-design programs and tools with the sector and newcomers themselves. So it's going to take us 5 years because the co-design element is such a big part of what we're planning. So I want to talk about what we'll accomplish in 5 years. We're hoping to have a really comprehensive set of curriculum and related tools, for example, journey maps that newcomers experience. And these tools will be available both in French and English. We'll have active citizenship program models that settlement agencies can implement. So that could be standalone active citizenship programs that your organizations can implement, or they can be pieces that are embedded into existing settlement services, for example, within Link. So both the curriculum and the program models will be tested by agencies across Ontario in years 3, 4, and 5. And from the beginning, from this period and before today, we are taking a co-design approach and engaging the sector and newcomers, including working with Francophone agencies and communities to address their unique realities. So we're also hoping that at the end of the 5 years, we'll have increased staff and organizational capacity to implement active citizenship programs, a supported network of diverse stakeholders across Canada in dialogue, working together, And there'll be some online and in-person convening. There'll be yearly roundtables, a year 5 conference, and an online community of practice through settlement.org. We also plan to have standard definitions, outcomes, and measures in place, and that new knowledge will be widely shared on what enables active citizenship, including elements of successful settlement and integration programs and ways in which democratic institutions can shift to be more inclusive as well. So we want to do this all with the sector and bring a strong anti-oppression, anti-racism, and combating anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism analysis and approach into our work as well, both in our project framing and our activities over the next 5 years, as well as what ends up in the final products that we co-design with all of you. So just a little quick overview of our own journey to date, what we've been up to. So April was the beginning of the 5-year initiative, and of course we were delayed by COVID-19, and it also necessitated us to rethink a number of our project activities, which involved a lot of engagement with people in person in the early years. We've also spent a lot of time on our project governance activities and planning for the work. And we've conducted an initial literature review, which I'll talk about, as well as we've started to draft a theory of change for the initiative and an evaluation framework. So we're right into the midst of stakeholder engagement activities right now and really all throughout the project. We've joined 7 Okasi regional meetings. We've had a couple of sessions in English and one in French to ask people specifically about the definition of active citizenship. We sent out a survey, and today we want to give you more details on the project because all the other previous engagements to date have been on the shorter side. And we're going to ask you some big questions that can help shape the initiative in the early stages. So highlights of the data gathered so far. We're going to talk to you about the data from 3 main sources: what we've heard from you so far, what we've seen from an initial literature review, and then some of our partners' lessons learned, so you have a sense of where we're coming from. So let's start with what we've heard from you so far. And this is really high level. If you want more details, we're happy to share that. So we've heard from you that the terms and the definitions specifically of active citizenship and civic engagement mean different things to different people. So there's no real shared understanding per se of either of those terms. Although generally speaking, we've talked about active citizenship as engagement in more formal political systems, such as voting or advocating on policy issues. And we've talked generally about civic engagement as more informal engagement, such as volunteering in your community to improve neighborhood safety, just as an example. We've heard from you that active citizenship is a journey we're all on, not just newcomers, and that it happens across the spectrum, and we need to look at it as a whole, not just the formal pieces. And you've shared with us that there are many indirect pathways to active citizenship. There's a lot of civic engagement work happening through informal civic arenas at the individual or local community level versus engagement at the formal democratic systems level. And this can all lead to active citizenship. Activities should be aimed towards social benefit outcomes, we've heard from you. And this should be a key component of how we frame active citizenship moving forward. And I think this was feedback in relation to the fact that some active citizenship definitions really do focus on sustaining democracy and democratic institutions. And we heard from you that it has to be more than that. We heard that a lot of work that does happen around active citizenship currently is about understanding rights and responsibilities, and that many organizations have programming to teach these rights and responsibilities, including through citizenship prep classes to prepare for the citizenship exam. And then we've also heard that there's a lack of sustained engagement, that there's a lot of short-term activities and engagements that are happening that are largely not due to your lack of desire, but due to limited resources and time to build out anything more comprehensive. So just a bit more on what we heard from the sector. We also heard from you that it's important that we co-design with you, and that we don't take a top-down approach, that we build on what already exists and avoid redundancy, and that anti-oppression, anti-racism has to be a critical part to our approach, that we don't put all the onus on newcomers. Changes need to happen in the broader systems and amongst other community members as well, and that there's a lot of opportunity and gaps that this project can fill. So thanks for all that really great feedback. Next, I want to talk to you a little bit, very high level. I don't want to spend too much time doing all the talking. We want to spend the bulk of the time hearing from you, but we do want to share with you what we've heard from the literature review in our first go around of it. So we've conducted an initial literature review of both scholarly and gray sources that drew on keywords associated with the project focus, mostly around active citizenship and civic engagement and some related terms, and focused around immigrants and refugees in Canada. Although we've gone into some depth, this is by no means a complete review of all the existing literature. So our goal at this point was to review definitions, or to do the review to find definitions and examples of key concepts in practice to support our evaluation and program design, as well as to determine areas for further exploration. For us, the Lit Review, the literature is just one source of expert data. Our information gathering, we see, will be an iterative process that goes back and forth between looking at the literature and hearing what we have to learn from the sector and immigrants and refugees themselves, and going back and forth between all those sources of great advice and expertise. So we've organized the findings from our literature review, our initial literature, into 4 main categories, which I'll talk about today: definitions, outcomes, barriers and enablers, and program characteristics. So first, definitions. I think I mentioned earlier that generally speaking, there is no widely agreed upon definition nor universal standards of measurement regarding active citizenship or civic engagement. There is, however, broad agreement that both terms or both sets of activities are key parts of any democratic society. But the interpretations varied so widely in the literature because the concepts embrace a diversity of goals and activities. So a little bit about what the literature says about active citizenship, a little bit more detail. So the term is more widely used outside of Canada. And the development of the concept actually traces back to the 1980s in the European context, when competing visions of collective identity and citizenship emerged in the decade leading up to the formation of the European Union. So there were a number of governmental and transnational organizations like the OECD, IMF, WTO, and World Bank that played a role in shaping the concept. So that gives you a sense of where this term came from. So active citizenship positions individuals in relation to the state through their citizenship and speaks primarily to the individual civic rights and responsibilities that the status of citizenship confers, based on the collective vision of citizenship within that state. So generally, it involves participation in formal democratic institutions and electoral politics. This is in the literature, it's not necessarily in the practice in Canada. And it aims to influence policy decision-making, and it typically includes things like voting, participation in local councils, engaging elected officials to advocate for certain issues, and collectively organizing in pursuit of common political goals. So let's talk a little bit about civic engagement. It's an umbrella term that captures a range of community building and both informal and formal civic activities. They are publicly enacted, group-based efforts in pursuit of common goals with social benefits through both political and non-political activities. And they combine knowledge, skills, and values in pursuit of these common goals. So civic engagement typically includes activities like volunteering, membership in social clubs and religious groups, and also collective actions such as rallies and protests. So it's more common for us to see civic engagement activities at play in our communities as compared to active citizenship. And by definition, active citizenship would have a greater impact on the policies and decisions that impact our lives and our society. So next I want to talk a little bit about what the literature says about outcomes. So the primary outcomes measured in the literature that we reviewed were around awareness, attitudes, understanding of key concepts, and participation. As well, other outcomes of interest in the literature included social inclusion, social capital, and democratic participation. So we're still sorting through the data on outcomes. Some of our early findings show there's some limited data around behavior change outcomes tied to active citizenship. They show that there are inconsistent metrics across the board to assess outcomes related to active citizenship and civic engagement. There are few direct outcome evaluations or studies that we can draw on. And there is limited data on outcomes tied to active citizenship in Canada in particular, although there's more about active citizenship outside of Canada. So in terms of outcomes tied to civic engagement, there's a little bit more data related to that. And the literature talks about how civic engagement leads to, it fosters individual capacities and skills, creates a sense of home and belonging, strengthens communities through social network building around shared interests and goals, and builds individual and community identity and empowerment. So the third category I want to talk about in the literature, the third of four, are barriers and enablers. So there were a number of factors shown in the literature that act as barriers or enablers to active citizenship. So we're going to touch on some of the key ones. A significant one and highly researched is a lack of trust in public institutions. And many have written about how confidence in public institutions is integral to democracy, a strong social fabric, and meaningful democratic engagement. So first, let me talk about what we mean by trust in public institutions. It can be measured, for example, as through the European Social Survey, through four variables: how much people trust their country's parliament, the legal system, the police, and its politicians. And what we know is that trust in public institutions is declining in Canada, and skepticism about the fairness of our current systems and the perception that institutions increasingly serve the interests of the few over the majority is growing. It's also important for us to note that a lack of trust in existing political and democratic institutions as they presently function does not necessarily imply a lack of faith in democracy as a principle and form of governance. So we also have seen in the literature that access to resources and a supportive political environment are necessary, although alone they're not sufficient to spur action amongst newcomers, per se. That bringing people together to share common concerns, interests, and build trust within their communities is an important entryway to engage them in broader civic engagement activities. We've read that recognizing and addressing complex personal and structural barriers are critical. The literature talks about how factors like education, income, family structure, language, neighborhood life, and other life-bearing circumstances highlight structural barriers individuals experience as a result, and that programs ideally should identify and address these barriers. The literature talks about the need to address the attitudes and the openness of the wider community. And it also talks about the need to build capacity as an essential element to civic engagement and a newcomer's process of settlement and integration. So developing the skills, knowledge, and confidence needed to contribute to the civic life of their communities and influence public decisions that impact their lives. So finally, from the literature, I want to talk about program models and intervention characteristics that we saw in the literature. So much of this reflects actually what we heard from the sector as well. First of all, there are programs and services to support economic, social, and cultural integration, but there are few programs available to support the newcomer's civic journey to active citizenship. And a scan of settlement services shows the majority of active citizenship programs focus on the goal of attaining citizenship. Active citizenship and related activities are often combined together with other programs. They're embedded into other programs, and together they work to attract, retain, engage, and inform newcomers. There can be multiple pathways to get to active citizenship and democratic participation. and creating opportunities for engagement and interaction with others in the community of similar circumstances is helpful, as well as increasing the mix. So it's helpful to bring people together from similar communities, and then it's also helpful to bring people together in groups where there's both similar, same communities mixed in, along with people from different communities. So there's an opportunity to interact in the program all together, and people can both see themselves in the participants and also meet new and different people. The literature talks about investing in place, that place-based programming can add real value, and that timing is important, and it's sometimes challenging to engage during off-cycle election years. And finally, that individuals face multiple and unique motivations that lead them to get involved civically. So programs need to be designed to address these different motivations. So I'm going to leave it there in terms of the literature review. That was a lot of data. I just want to talk really fairly briefly about some of our lessons learned. The partners, and particularly through the partnership that Ryerson and Niche had in some of our civic engagement programs. First, I want to talk about community and program level lessons. So we've certainly learned that if you build it, they still may not come. So this is an old reference, and maybe I'm aging myself. So this is a reference to the film Field of Dreams, where they say the opposite: if you build it, they will come. Our experience is the opposite. So this is not just about designing a great training program. Motivation and interest to engage at an individual level is impacted by many factors, including a person's pre-settlement experiences, which may include war, and trauma, and political unrest. It's also impacted by post-settlement experiences, such as racism, anti-Black racism, marginalization of different kinds, lack of valuing of immigrants and refugees' assets and credentials, and things along those lines. So we're saying it's not just enough to teach a newcomer how government works. There's so much more work we need to do to foster the conditions in which they're motivated to engage and believe that they can actually add value. Other people believe that they'll add value and believe that they can actually make a difference. Next, we've learned that respect, deep respect, and meeting people where they're at is critical. So in terms of urgent and basic needs, are we there for them when they need us at this front? Are we asking them to lead a voter engagement activity, but they're struggling to put food on their table? If we want to engage new community members in the conversation, we must find a way to join their table and not ask them to join our table. We've learned so much of the work of engaging people is about relationship building and building trust. And we've also learned that strengthening newcomer voices in action requires both program and system level interventions. So it's not just about implementing programs where they are engaging. Of course, we need to create programs where their voices are genuinely heard, and we are meeting them where they are at. We're also creating opportunities for them to connect with other folks who are facing similar barriers, and creating a space where people are able to have a dialogue about the connection between their personal barriers and the systemic ones, and practicing, giving them an opportunity to practice collective action and actually experiencing a win where their voices, their collective voices, were heard here in Canada. And this is also about shifting how others listen and respond to immigrants and refugees, those in decision-making roles. And finally, we've also learned that anti-oppression, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, and systems change have to be part of any meaningful civic engagement work. So running a music program is important, but without an analysis of power, there's no shifting and rebalancing in terms of access to opportunities, resources, and decision-making. And finally, don't underestimate the value of having fun. So just one final slide that I will share really briefly around some organizational or staff level lessons learned, that it helps to have leadership on board and have a compelling vision of how civic engagement can be embedded all across the entire organization. It helps to have an internal staff role that acts as a champion of civic engagement and coaches other staff. And it helps to have training opportunities for staff to really engage And then of course, it's also very helpful to have evidence and tracking data, which is key to learning. So I just want to wrap up by saying we've shared some data that we've gathered to date. And now we really want to talk with you about how we might envision or reimagine immigrant and refugees' journeys to an engaged, active citizenship.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. So I'm going to suggest that we actually move into our breakout rooms now, and for any questions related to this content, that we add them into our discussion post breakout room and have a large discussion all together. So as we move into our rooms, Jen, you've given us so much content to chew on and to think about. So we have 3 breakout room topics, and each person on this call will be split into breakout rooms into one of these topics. So the first one is the scoping and relationship between formal and informal routes to civic engagement. Active citizenship, as Jen mentioned, is more formal by definition, according to the literature at least, and civic engagement is a bit less formal, and there's value in both. So how do we see both of these intersecting, particularly in the context of this project? The second item is about the role of this moment that we find ourselves in, this cultural moment, this economic moment, this systemic moment that we're in. 2020 as a year has given us so many systems level changes, from the pandemic, of course, and all the way to anti-Black racism protests. And so where in the context of all of that does this project, which is also seeking systems change, how does that fit into everything that's been happening? And lastly, as we develop tools and program models through this project, we would love to hear your advice and expertise on program opportunities and interventions for newcomer civic engagement. So as I mentioned, each of you will be split into 6 breakout groups, and we'll be discussing one of the questions. And we'll do breakout rooms for about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll go until about 3:00 p.m. And then we will come back for a larger group discussion. And at that point, we can also touch on some of the themes that were discussed by Jen just now. So in terms of tech, you will, in a moment, will be prompted to move to a breakout room. When that happens, I think you have to click a blue button, will pop up, and you just click join, and you will automatically be added to a breakout room. And once it's near 3:00, you will again be prompted to join the main session, and then we'll all reconvene here and we'll have a closing discussion and talk about next steps of how to stay connected. So I'll pass it over to the tech team to start our breakout rooms, and we'll see you all soon. Great. So I hope that you all had some rich discussions in your breakout rooms. I know ours definitely was. We had lots to chew on. So let's hear back from the room facilitators before we open up the floor for an open discussion. So facilitators, I'll call on you folks, and if you could all share the top, let's say, 2 insights, 1 to 2 insights from your discussion. So we'll start with Lena.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. It's hard to share just a couple of points because there were a lot of great comments that came up. One of them, and this is one that we've heard elsewhere, is that the concept of volunteering doesn't connect with newcomers very much. It doesn't resonate with them because it's not something that it's not a concept that they really have in their cultures, because in their cultures, community engagement is built into the way that they interact with their communities, and sort of conceptualizing how we talk about these things would be helpful in terms of meeting the newcomers where they're at, and using terms and concepts and activities that would resonate with them. Sort of in that vein, another really helpful comment was that those that shape the policies and the programs meant to affect newcomers' lives aren't representative of the newcomer communities themselves. And so often formal funding will go toward programs that don't speak to the lives of newcomers. An example was that, for women, for instance, they might have a lot more barriers in terms of engaging in formal systems, and some of the informal activities like a party, swimming lessons, things like that, that they can also bring their kids to, would be a lot more effective in engaging them civically. And those are the kinds of things that we need to draw our attention to. So thank you so much to my group for all their great comments.
Thank you, Lena. John, would you like to go next? And if each facilitator could also share what topic their room was discussing.
Yeah, so this is John here. And we were discussing formal and informal engagement. And I guess two things, there was, again, a lot of very interesting just conversation, but two things jumped out for me anyway from our conversation is one, this concern around initial hesitations and maybe even fear that some newcomers can feel as they are trying to engage our more formal institutions, and how we address that fear. And there was some really good ideas about how to do that and how to confront that. And the other being sort of an expectation that can be put on people is that you're going to be doing sort of like everything in civic engagement, and that sometimes just being a good person or a kind, caring person or a good neighbor is a valuable form of civic engagement. And how do we capture that piece in this, and where does that fit into that journey of civic engagement, and how does that get acknowledged, was two great questions that came up among others.
Great, thank you so much. Jen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I feel like we just scratched the surface in that conversation, so definitely looking forward to engaging further. As with others, it's kind of hard to capture it fully in just a couple of comments, but I'd say, one set of comments that, or pieces of things that we were talking about were around the challenges of just doing civic engagement with people who have been here for generations, who aren't dealing with the challenges of settling in a new country. So how do we really expect people to be meaningfully engaged in the midst of going through so much change in their lives? And might we want to expect something different depending on what people are experiencing at different points in their lives and at different points in the settlement process? So maybe we, there's a little bit of intervention or activity early days, but that, we focus more on those who've been here for a few years, and that we also build off of the expertise of those who have been here for longer, and that they can play a role as mentors. And there's lots of opportunities working with youth and supporting people as we're doing one-on-one services to put in little sparks or catalyst to get them thinking or getting engaged in other activities. We also talked about just generally like how you are welcomed into the country. What your experiences are in the early days has such a huge impact on whether or not you want to participate, and that it can help to create a safer environment with people of the same culture, same race, same language, whoever makes you feel comfortable, and creating this context in which you are valued and appreciated and supported to engage more fully. So that's just a couple of the pieces we talked about.
Great, thank you. Peg?
Hi. We had a number of comments that came through the chat in particular that were helpful for sort of specific ways that we might, things that we might consider in terms of our development and implementation. And then in the conversation, there was a theme that came up, and it was really around systemic, institutionalized tensions and oppressions, and also decolonizing the work. So one of the tensions that we explored a little bit was the tension between the fact that the project is IRCC funded and many of the agencies receive IRCC funding, and that IRCC can put very specific constraints on some of the work. And one of the things that we're talking about is supporting people to challenge institutions a little bit. So there's some tension there, and that it's important to kind of navigate that. A related, on a different, a different scale, but related challenge and tension is the work of a sort of centralized group doing this work. When we need to unlearn some of that and balance it, not even balance it, sort of give up that power to make sure that people who are bringing these skills already get to guide the work. So real meaningful engagement with people and leadership from participants to guide this work, tapping into the skill sets, the knowledge that they've already cultivated in their previous experiences. Both of those themes will require some unlearning, lots of unlearning in different ways, and also some new learning, but that it shouldn't, the work shouldn't follow traditional sort of colonial methods of having, a single point of knowledge then distributed, that instead it should really be a collective unlearning and learning together kind of approach, tapping into people's skills that are not just the institutionalized ones. And I hope I brought that forward well for the discussion group that I was working with.
Great, thank you. Cam?
Great. Yeah, thank you. We had a great discussion. Thank you, everybody in my breakout group for the conversation. So really, I guess 2 or 3 points. One of them is really builds on what Lena's group was saying, is this idea about not assuming that don't come in with preset roles, responsibilities, and expectations around what volunteerism and engagement and active citizenship means, because for some that may not be relevant. Be relevant to their experience. It may be relevant to their life, but it doesn't really reflect what they know. So providing a form of engagement that really allows people to see possibilities, but also to learn from that, which really, I guess, builds on sort of the second and third point is one of the things is that in what we do is it needs to be made meaningful. There has to be some meaning. What are people going to get out of it? And it doesn't have to be anything tangible in the sense of monetary or something like that, but there needs to be some sort of obvious way to do that, particularly when you're dealing with communities that don't have the experience working, with the idea of active citizenship as we've started to talk about it. And then the last one was really around storytelling, and these sort of all fit together, is this ability to give that opportunity to tell and listen to stories, because oftentimes people might actually be able to fit into ways we're doing things much more easier, but they don't realize it. They don't actually realize they have skills, they have abilities, there's ways they can contribute right away that might not be aware to them background. And we did talk a little bit just around the idea of some of those methods don't have to be all conventional, just sit down one-to-one. They can be done in groups, they can be individual, they can be through art, they can be done digitally, but there really needs to be that back and forth. That's really one of the big things. It's not just about us broadcasting in, but it's also about learning and having that conversation. So I hope I've been able to encapsulate that in a very quick way, what we talked about in our group.
Thank you so much, Cam. And I can give a summary of our group. So we were talking about systems change. And at the beginning of our discussion, we realized that the group wanted to talk about something that's a bit more less broad and more local to their experiences. So we ended up having a conversation about organizational capacity and staff training, specifically in the context of anti-Black racism and a little bit in the context of COVID-19. So there were comments about how it wasn't until this year that we really realized the magnitude of how systemic issues impact specifically Black communities, but other marginalized folks. And so there was a lot of discussion about what each organization has been doing this year, ranging from recruiting more diverse board members to anti-Black racism trainings, to hiring equity leaders to better support the organization as a whole. And so we did a lot of conversation that was very much at the organizational level, which was very important as well, because at the end of the day, it is staff in the sector that will be implementing the tools that are created as part of this project. So thanks everybody for your summaries. Now let's hear from people in the room. So we have just under about 10 minutes to have a discussion with you. So feel free to unmute your mic or use the chat, but this is your time if you have questions or comments or anything that you'd like to share.
I would like to share a little bit of funny story here, because we don't have to be very serious.
Definitely.
So I am an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, non-existing country anymore. And I live in Canada for almost 30 years. And I work very closely at Jewish Family Services in Ottawa with Russian newcomers. So to tell people from former communist bloc, or try to even explain to them what volunteerism means, you cannot succeed. You cannot explain, you cannot ask them to understand. But volunteerism means that if we are distributing fruits and vegetables, so they immediately volunteered, to our surprise, but they managed to come with their backpacks. And as soon as they started to distribute, they made sure that their backpacks were full, because that's their reward for volunteerism. And it was almost impossible for us to explain. So we took we cut the losses and we did keep them. They were doing an amazing job. But, the volunteerism is really the creation of Anglo-Saxon system. Peg was reminding us of the colonial system, but, other colonial powers like France or Spain, they do not necessarily have that civic engagement of civic population as United Kingdom has, right, of Great Britain. So it's incredibly hard to explain the people volunteerism. However, the young people or the youth, we are training. So because now they came to Canada, they are accepting not just the language, but the culture. But just the sheer understanding of volunteerism is almost completely impossible to explain. So that's my participation.
I would just like to add, I think it's the terminology that we use. It has to make some sense and meaning for people who are immigrant. And it's not only volunteerism. I think people were living in their home countries before, and they were helping even adverse situations and circumstances. So this is not new for them to volunteer. I think we have set rigid categories and defined terminology that we try to impose on them based on the westernized notion of what is volunteerism and how do we define it. They are doing this volunteer work. They were having more social meaning of volunteerism. But instead of using what is the concept of volunteerism in their minds, we are trying to train them within the pathways that we have structured. And that has created a cognitive dissonance in these people. And this is a mental health dilemma, rather than saying that they are not doing it and they are not understanding. So again, we are using a lot of blame game kind of stuff in settlement sector, even though we are trying to help newcomers, but we are pointing fingers on this is your responsibility to fit into the structure of volunteerism that we have defined for you. So there are set categories, rigid defined boundaries. You have to learn. rather than narrowing down and expanding these concepts so that we can embrace this diversity. This diversity will not be, this is my understanding, this diversity will not be making any meaningful sense unless we reach to the point where these people are coming from, because what we are doing now, we are having even defined category, who is client and who is a provider. We are even not getting out of it since how long we have been providing these settlement services, but still we are considering this is where you belong and this is where I do belong. I think all these people who are working in the settlement sector, they are having multiple roles. They are having leadership roles in the society, but we are not considering this dimensionality and this functionality of our people in the sector. We are creating, these are the providers and this is, so unless we do not get this blended and we get, okay, so creating new meaning of these terminologies so that people can understand.
Yeah.
Our boundaries are so structured.
Yeah, that's very true.
This is civic engagement. This is volunteerism. This is this is, if you don't fit into this box, you're out of this box.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, and I know you're a psychologist as well, so I really appreciate the connection to mental health. That's so important, especially this year where we're all feeling that, and it gets exacerbated by so many other intersections of where people are. I see that there's someone who has their hand up, and we have just a couple of minutes. So Hanadi, I see that your hand is up, and there's some great conversation happening in the chat as well. Hanadi, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I just want to share a few things like about volunteering and within really between newcomers that they arrive to Canada. There are uncertain things that they are not aware of, and there are fears really of those uncertainty that they are faced. I agree with the previous person who spoke now. It's just we are setting few things for them, and this uncertainty things and the fears that they have from this interaction, and if they are really doing right or they will be doing wrong, or how do they speak, how do they interact, what are the liability within if they did something wrong. This is will restrain them of going in like in any volunteering or any opportunity for them to experience this volunteer opportunities. First, the terminology is not really there for them. They didn't try it. They didn't understand it from the beginning. I did the same thing when I first came to Canada as an immigrant. I didn't know that there is an opportunity called volunteer because I didn't find any jobs. And when I first joined, really, I immigrated to Canada, and there will be really some kind of understanding, go really to create your Canadian references, go to do this, go to that. But there was really lots of fears. I felt that I don't belong to this society because I am not certain of many things, that how can I interact, how can I do it, is this authority, is this not authority, is this really a place that I can say anything or I can do anything, and what are my really directions. Sometimes it's not a clear, transparent picture for people that they would like to volunteer. So this is why they restrain themselves from continuing with those volunteers if it's not really the picture is not really transparent to them. How would they do it?
Great, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. Yasmin, would you like to share something? And then we have time for probably one or two very quick comments. Yep, go ahead.
I just want to first apologize. I was in John's session, but I had to step away from the session, so I couldn't contribute. But I come from a settlement organization. We have multi-services, and we focus a lot on volunteering, civic engagement, especially with youth. And I feel the concept of volunteering and settlement and civic engagement and training is easier to communicate and get you to understand it, because part of that school requirement is for them to do their certain volunteer hours in school and get a certification. So we do provide civic engagement and volunteer training sessions to youth, and in which we talk about rights and responsibilities, knowing about the laws, following, etc., etc. But we also give them opportunity to volunteer in different fields of their choice. Could it be in a food bank? It could be working with seniors, like we developed a senior youth and seniors intergenerational gardening activities where they would plant vegetables, grow the produce, and give it to a shelter for food, etc. It would also focus on, for example, at Christmas time, because our organization, COSTI, has a lot of shelters where we house refugees, we give them opportunity to help refugee kids there. And this way help them understand what civic engagement is. But with adults, we find this concept of volunteering a bit difficult to get them to understand, because they feel, oh, why should I work for free? Or, what am I expected to do? And also do not realize that importance of volunteering in any opportunity gives them some kind of credibility of the work they've done without money, and also helps build their experience. So we have a lot of newcomers who've had been social workers, or who've had experience as teachers in the past, to sort of give them opportunity to volunteer in some of our programs to just build their capacity of work. So teaching them how to understand the value of volunteering, and it's not about yourself. Some of the refugees, like was mentioned by a lot of participants, they come from countries or culture where volunteerism doesn't exist. It's either you work for a pay or you don't do anything free. But coming to Canada and seeing other people engage, we've found that a lot of newcomers are beginning to understand. I can speak for my own self. 20 years ago, I came to Canada, and I was told, volunteer if you really want to look for a job. And I said, how's that going to help me? And well, I did that for an extended period of time. And then I realized when you're volunteering in an organization, when you have a passion to the work that you're doing, you're also building some informal experience in that capacity, and getting to know the resources, getting to know the sector, getting to know what's available. And that actually was the key for me to find my first job in Canada in the settlement sector. So when you share your own experiences with newcomers, they understand the value, and we make it an opportunity for all of them to speak their own experience, so they understand and see how they can dot everything together to realize the importance of both of them.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And I see there's a comment in the chat about the importance of tailoring civic engagement to various groups. So we are officially at the end of our time here. So I'm going to ask that we share our ways to stay in touch. So this is our contact information. For those that were in breakout rooms and your comment wasn't spoken out loud during the shareback, not to worry. We did take copious notes. The facilitators took notes, and those notes will be incorporated into the project. We also have a website, which I'm going to put into the chat here, and you can click on that link and sign up for our newsletter and receive updates on the project. And yes, thank you again. If anyone would like to get in touch, I will put my email into the chat, and feel free to write to us about any additional feedback, input, or questions. And yeah, thank you so much to the project team and to all of you for participating so fully, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.